This video is a compilation of all the Soul Calibur 2 weapon review shorts, this time in a better resolution. Enjoy!
Mitsurugi.
Korefuji. This katana deals 30% more damage, but has a shorter reach. In general, these kinds of weapons are good because most fighters are closer ranged. Although it's a little concerning for Mitsurugi, it isn't that much. A good starting weapon that you'll use often until you get one of the later ones. 7 out of 10. Two-handed sword. Soul charge buffs attack, but your horizontal attacks are easier to break with vertical attacks. The second effect is void because it'll always happen no matter what you use or how much damage you deal. Why risk soul charging for more damage when you can already deal more base damage with the previous weapon? 5 out of 10. Shamshir. Has longer reach but takes damage as counters, another common effect with many weapons. These are not worth using because they're risky. It's not worth taking more damage in favor of longer range. Another weapon is similar to this, but worse. 4 out of 10. Basilard. Similar to Korefuji, it gives 30% more defense, but has a shorter reach. It does not deal powerful single strikes. Again, Korefuji is better. 4 out of 10. Gassen. Deals damage as counters, but loses 3 HP on an attack. Dangerous to use. Typically, there's a way to bypass the health loss on an attack by using throws, but since it deals counter damage, not likely. 3 out of 10. Tobal. It has a longer reach and deals guard damage, but loses defense. The 35% defense nerf severely hurts this sword. The long range and chip damage is tempting, but it's not worth it. 3 out of 10. Masamune. Increases both attack and defense. Soul charge also buffs speed but loses defense. Like that ever mattered, considering the base defense buff. You don't really need a soul charge because the base stats are good enough to begin with. This katana replaces all of his other weapons besides the legendary. As for this, borderline legendary weapon. 9 out of 10. Soul Edge. Like most of the Soul Edge variants, it deals more damage but loses health over time. That's about it for this one. Nothing else. 4 out of 10. Damascus Sword. It's similar to Masamune but with more power and defense. The only drawback is not being able to guard. Depending on your playstyle, it can either work or not. Regardless, it's a big upgrade and it gets the same rating as Masamune. 9 out of 10.
Taki.
Kunai. Raises both attack and defense despite having a shorter reach. Right away, this is one of her best weapons. The shorter reach is barely noticeable and Taki is a shorter range character to begin with. You'll be using this most of the time. 8 out of 10. Slicer. Not much of a slicer. Slightly better soul charge, but you end up taking counter damage. Doesn't deal powerful single strikes. Again, ignore the easier to break horizontal or vertical attack effect since that always happens regardless. You'll end up getting sliced using this deceitful weapon. 4 out of 10. Kagekiri. Deals guard damage but at the cost of nerfing 35% defense. The defense reduction is not worth risking in favor of dealing chip damage. There's better and safer alternatives when it comes to dealing chip damage. 3 out of 10. Yori Toshi. Once again, reduced defense, but this time soul charging makes more moves unblockable. It's Kagekiri but even worse. Losing defense in favor of risking taking more hits while charging for a tiny boost that lasts for a few seconds. 2 out of 10. Fumakugi. Heals health on attack but the reach is shorter and takes guard damage. The saving grace is a healing effect. Again, the shorter range isn't too much of a concern due to Taki's range. Taking guard damage can also be a concern. Again, the healing makes up for it and since Taki can be a multi-attacker, it can work in our favor. 5 out of 10. Silent Edge. Longer reach but attacks deal less damage. The longer range doesn't make up for its lack in attack power. It's the opposite of Kunai. At least you won't die quicker unlike Kagekiri and Yori Toshi. 4 out of 10. Kamizorore. Soul charge increases speed but loses attack again. It's Silent Edge but worse. The temporary speed boosts don't mean anything with the blade stalls to begin with. 3 out of 10. Soul Edge. Increases plenty of attack and defense at the cost of losing HP per attack. This variant isn't as bad as most of them, but at the same time, it's not as good as some of them. You can bypass the HP reduction by throwing and it'll still deal more damage. The defense buff helps. Still, you need to be careful using this variant. 6 out of 10. Priest Naga. Deals 40% more damage, has a longer reach, and soul charge heals HP. In the Japanese version, it used to take guard damage. The higher damage is just as good as her soul edge. This is one of the few times where soul charge is useful. The best way to use soul charge healing is after you throw. Easily one of the better legendaries and her best weapon. 9 out of 10.
Talim.
Wind Guide. raises 30% defense and deals guard damage, but at the cost of taking damage as counters. Even taking guaranteed counter damage, the defense buff keeps Talon at bay. This is a direct upgrade. The 40% chip damage also helps out. A good starting weapon for her. 7 out of 10. Tonfa. This one trades attack in favor of defense. Wind Guide is already better because it doesn't need to sacrifice attack power and lie about powerful single strikes. 4 out of 10. Side Harp. Like Tonfa, it deals less damage. This time Soul Charge makes more of her moves unblockable. It's a worse Tonfa with the requirement to Soul Charge to buff it briefly. 3 out of 10. Double Crescent Blade. Gives more attack and defense buff with a little less range. Soul Charge grants even more attack at the cost of reducing speed. You don't really need to do that for it to work. She can deal lots of damage with or without Soul Charge. Easily her best weapon. 9 out of 10. Chachu. Higher attack but takes guard damage. Not as good as their previous weapon, but she already has worse weapons than Chachu. 5 out of 10. Sao Ankana. The right blade reaches a lot longer and deals chip damage. It comes at a cost of losing HP over time. This is her worst weapon. She's fine being a shorter range character, and Wind Guide already does a better job at dealing guard damage. Losing health over time is much worse than losing defense. 2 out of 10. Hikari. Despite the smaller size, the left blade reaches just as much as Sao Ankana but loses health on hit. Another worthless late game weapon. At least you can bypass the health loss by throwing. Not as bad as the previous weapon, but still 3 out of 10. Soul Edge. Trades defense in favor of dealing more damage and healing on hit. The defense nerf may be risky, but the buffs make up for it. The attack boost is a saving grace. If the lower defense scares you, then stick with Double Crescent Blade. 8 out of 10. Soul Calibur. Longer range and heals HP on an attack. The downside is always taking counter hits. This Soul Calibur variant is in the middle, but not a bad legendary in general. The healing makes up for the counter damage risk at least. 8 out of 10.
Cassandra.
Spiked Shield. Deals 30% more damage. That's about it. Ignore the vulnerable to guard impact effect. What it's really saying is your horizontal attacks are easier to break with vertical attacks, which is also just as void because it happens no matter what. A simple yet effective starting weapon. 7 out of 10. Dark Blade. Has a longer range and deals chip damage but has lower defense. It's exactly like Mitsurugi's Total War. The longer reach and chip damage doesn't excuse severely lower defense. 3 out of 10. Mite Sashi. Trades attack power for more defense. Another dull yet bulky weapon. This is another case of the previous weapons already being better than this. 4 out of 10. Spine Blade. Deals more base and guard damage despite having a shorter reach. Generally these weapons aren't too bad. It's essentially a better version of Spike Shield without the description lies. 8 out of 10. Catsbalger. Has a long range but has lower defense. Soul Charge speeds her up and the loss of HP during the charge. This weapon is nothing but a liability. It puts her in harm more than it helps. Temporary speed boost doesn't excuse taking more damage and losing more HP while charging. Needless to say that it's her worst weapon. 1 out of 10. Red Crystal Rod. Recovers HP over time. Just like Spike Shield, it lies about being more vulnerable to guard impact. It's not terrible, but you want to use a weapon that does more than healing health. Little bonus points for a Tower Draga reference. 6 out of 10. Ivan the Terrible. Longer range and attack raises during Soul Charge. Some damage is reflected back on hits. It's not as bad as the other weapons, but at the same time, not as good as some of the other weapons. More base damage is always better than a temporary Soul Charge attack buff. 5 out of 10. Soul Edge. Deals more base damage than it always counters, but loses HP on each attack. On paper, the damage buffs are tempting, until you damage yourself. Still, at least you can dodge the HP reduction by throwing. 6 out of 10. Valkyrie. Higher attack and defense plus heals health over time. The drawback is taking plenty of guard damage. Even if you're up against weapons that deal more chip damage, it's still one of the best legendary weapons in the game. The healing and defense buff makes up for the downside. The damage is also pretty good. The weapon fits perfectly with her third outfit since it's a reference to the Legend of Valkyrie. 9 out of 10.
Yun Sung.
Machete. Deals some chip damage but loses 40% defense. It's too risky of a starting weapon. The guard damage may be tempting, but the defense nerf hurts this weapon badly. 4 out of 10. Kanjar. Raises defense at the cost of having shorter reach. Does not deal powerful single strikes. At least it's better than Machete. It's not bad even with shorter range. Being able to withstand more damage is always a plus, just as much as dealing more damage. 7 out of 10. Xiaolian. Longer reach, but takes plenty of reflected damage on hit. Despite the cool looking sword, it's not worth taking almost as much damage as you deal. It's just as bad as Machete. 4 out of 10. Giant Butcher Knife. It's another shorter range yet stronger weapon. This time, that's just about it. It's still a pretty decent weapon, at least the description doesn't lie. 7 out of 10. Shang Yang. Lowered attack and defense stats in favor of the useless bringing your horizontal attacks with your vertical effects. It also speeds up Soul Charge. That won't matter if the base stats are lower. It's about as effective as his joke weapon. 1 out of 10. Ramdeo. Longer range and heals on hit, but takes counter and guard damage. This is a risk-reward type of weapon. Typically in this game, the longer range weapons have severe downsides. This one isn't as bad. Depending on your playstyle, the counter and chip damage may scare you, or the healing makes up for it. 6 out of 10. Blue Thunder. Deals counter hits, despite less base damage. This weapon is like giving a physically offensive Pokemon modest nature when they should have adamant. Give it back to Huang. 4 out of 10. Soul Edge. Raises attack power and heals on hit. Takes a nasty 50% guard damage. Even scarier than Valkyrie's guard damage risk. For a weapon that almost takes as much regular damage, it's his best weapon. The attack buff and healing is pretty good. Just don't block too much. 8 out of 10. Han Guang. One of the 2 longest reaching weapons. Soul Charge speeds him up at the cost of losing HP while charging. In the Japanese version, it takes health away on each attack. In the overseas version, it deals a tiny bit of chip damage. Either way, his Soul Edge variant is better. It's not too much of a risk if you skip Soul Charge entirely, but it makes you wish it would do more than just have a longer reach. 6 out of 10.
Raphael.
Ape. Defense raises 30%, doesn't have weak single strikes. The vertical attack break and horizontal attack effect is void because it happens no matter what weapon you use. Other than the lies, it's a decent starting weapon for Raphael. 7 out of 10. Stiletto. Lower range, but it deals guard damage. Unlike most of the shorter range weapon, this doesn't deal more damage. It's also not too bad, but the lighter weapons fare better than this. 6 out of 10. Raiter Palash. Deals more damage, but you end up taking hits as counters. No, it does not deal guard damage. Despite the counter damage risk and the chip damage lie, it's a good offensive weapon. However, it gets overshadowed by the next weapon. 7 out of 10. Wodao. Deals a little more damage than Raiter Palash, and Soul Charge makes more moves unblockable. The only drawback is the reduced reach yet again. The shorter reach doesn't matter on someone like Raphael since he excels at vertical attacks. The increased attack and Soul Charge buffs makes this a lethal weapon. This is his best weapon, even better than his legendary. 9 out of 10. Schweitzer. Soul Charge increases attack and has the other B vs A effect that is void. Compared to the previous weapons, it's a step back. It's better to have more base attack than letting yourself wide open while charging. At least there aren't any harsher downsides with this. 5 out of 10. Holy Antler. Lowers defense in favor of dealing counter damage. Again, Raiter Palash and Wodao are better because of the higher base damage instead of counter hits. Even Raiter Palash is safer because at least the counter damage risk isn't as nasty as losing base defense. 3 out of 10. Istuk. Better Soul Charge that increases attack, but slows you down while charged. The description doesn't tell you that it has a longer reach and harshly reduces defense. This is his worst weapon because not only the description tells half of the effects, the defense nerf and speed reduction on Soul Charge hinders this weapon badly. Avoid using this. 2 out of 10. Soul Edge. Raises both attack and defense but loses HP over time. It's a mid-Soul Edge variant. The buffed base stats seem tempting, especially the increased defense, but the health loss over time is what severely hurts this weapon. Not as severe as the other variants since this one drains 2 HP over time, but it's still not safe. 6 out of 10. Queen's Guard. This weapon is similar to his Soul Edge variant, buff attack and defense, but this time it has a longer reach and you take some damage reflected back on hit. This is the better of his ultimate weapons. If it wasn't for the reflected damage risk, this would have been one of his best. 8 out of 10.
Kilik.
Quarterstaff. Raises defense but has a shorter reach. Unlike most fighters, the shorter range is a concern for Kilik. The defense buff makes up for this at least. Depending on your playstyle, this could either be a decent or mediocre starting weapon. 6 out of 10. Ling Xing Subo. The description is all lies. Talks about having powerful single strikes, yet it doesn't. It's supposed to make vertical attacks break and horizontal attacks easier for you and your opponent. As I said on previous videos, that effect is void. It's nothing more than a glorified reskin of his default weapon. 5 out of 10. Iron Staff. Deals more damage but loses HP on attack. Terrible for someone like Kilik. His multi-striking attacks will end up hurting himself more than his opponents, especially when they miss. Another weapon power creeps this staff. It's his worst weapon in the overseas version. 2 out of 10. Gunland Bamboo. Heals HP when attacking. Does not have weak single strikes. It has the same useless side effect as Lingxing Subo. Aside from being strictly a healing weapon, it's his best one to use. It's the polar opposite of Iron Staff. Most of his weapons have disgusting risks, so this staff is the saving grace. 8 out of 10. Roku Shakubo. Has a longer reach but always takes hits as counters. It's the reverse quarter staff but swapped the defense nerf with Tekken counter hits. There are worse options than this, but there are better weapons than this staff also. 4 out of 10. Ahmad. It's a better version of Iron Staff. Still has the damage buff and HP loss on attack. This staff deals slightly more damage and chips their guard. It's still a risky option, but at least it has more benefits than just a damage boost. 5 out of 10. Dual Rod. It has a longer reach that boosts damage through Soul Charge, but loses defense and slows him down while charged. It's like Raphael's S-Stock. At least the longer range works with Kilik. It's still not worth losing defense in favor of mandatory Soul Charge buffs that slow him down. 3 out of 10. Soul Edge. Deals more damage and Soul Charges faster while losing HP over time. The faster Soul Charge is barely noticeable compared to the other legendary weapons with the same effect. Plus, there's no Soul Charge buffs other than that. Once again, the HP loss over time is what hurts this weapon even more. 4 out of 10. Jingu Staff. Longest reach out of all the weapons in this game, it also takes some guard damage. It's only usable for its long range. If it had more effects, this would have been a great or even decent staff. In the Japanese version, it had a defense nerf and took harsher chip damage. It's his worst weapon in the Japanese version, but overseas, it's not as bad as Iron Staff. 3 out of 10.
Xianghua.
Card. Deals less damage and has a shorter reach, but Soul Charge grants more unblockable moves. A direct downgrade from No Name. You cannot deal any powerful single strikes and score hits upon the opponent using this. 3 out of 10. Northern Star. Deals and takes guaranteed counter hits. Better than the previous weapon at least. The counter damage risk isn't as harsh as reduced defense. 6 out of 10. Evil Soul Calibur. Deals counter hits and raises attack through Soul Charge, which drains HP and lowers 30% base defense. This does more harm than good. It's bad enough her defense got nerfed. The Soul Charge is even more riskier due to losing HP while charging. You'd wish it would deal more base damage instead. 2 out of 10. Compass. Deals guard damage but loses reach. It's better than Card at least. The 40% chip damage is also pretty good. It's worth using this over her previous weapons. 7 out of 10. Qixing Sword. Lowers attack and defense in favor of longer reach. Suffers the same problem as Yonson's Chen Ying besides longer reach. It doesn't deal powerful single strikes. Another weapon to avoid. 2 out of 10. Krita Yuga. It heals HP during Soul Charge. It also has the pointless speed break and A attack effects since that always happens in general. Compared to her other weapons, it's better than most of them. One of her throws activates Soul Charge, so that's what makes it get a higher score. 7 out of 10. Blue Storm. It's a slightly better version of the Qixing Sword. This time it deals more damage rather than less. It still has the defense nerf and longer reach. It's not as risky as her other swords, but the defense reduction can be concerning. 6 out of 10. Soul Edge. Deals more damage and Soul Charge grants more unblockable moves, at the cost of losing HP per attack. Another mid Soul Edge variant that focuses on damage. She's another character that has fast multi-hitting moves, so the HP loss on attack is not worth it unless you like to throw. 5 out of 10. Soul Calibur. Heals HP on attack, which is a higher 20%. It takes counter damage too. Even though it's the weakest of the 3 Soul Calibur variants, it's still her best weapon. The healing isn't a lot, but like I said before, she's a swift multi-hitting attacker, so it kind of works. 8 out of 10.
Maxi.
Totsuryu. It says it deals powerful single strikes, but lacks offense. The second part is only true. This one's already weaker than a stock weapon. 4 out of 10. Chained Kozuka. Has a longer reach but drops defense. It's worse than Tetsuryu because the defense nerf is more dangerous and the longer reach is minor. This is his worst weapon. 2 out of 10. Tobal. Just like Kozuka, it has less defense, but this time it raises attack power. It's a little better than the former because the damage makes a difference instead of a little more reach. It's a glass cannon at best. 5 out of 10. Raime. Attack increases while soul charge, but takes reflected damage on hit. It's just as risky as Fat Tobal because of the soul charge leaving you open and the self-damage risk. 4 out of 10. Fuzuroi. Deals more damage and one of the rods has a longer reach. Even dealing with the unorthodox design of the nunchucks, it's his best option. Way better than a lot of his weapons. The damage boost helps out with his weapon plenty. 9 out of 10. Modified Flail. Longer reach but takes guard damage. Compared to Kozuka, it's a step up, but compared to Fuzuroi, it's a step down. The longer reach on both rods isn't worth the risk taking chip damage. At least it looks like it has more range. 5 out of 10. Falcon. Another longer range weapon that puts him at risk. Soul Charge raises speed, but not only does it reduce his defense temporarily, it also hurts him per attack. This one is equally as bad as Chain Kozuka because of the barely noticeable longer reach and risks. At least this time the defense drop is temporary, but it still hurts. 3 out of 10. Soul Edge. Deals more damage and chips guard while losing HP over time. If it wasn't for losing 3 HP over time, it would have been a good variant of Soul Edge. Still a better option than the bladed nunchucks. 4 out of 10. Vajra. Deals more base damage than our counter hits, along with adding more unblockable attacks through Soul Charge. The only downside is that you can't guard. The damage boost is more than enough to be lethal. At least it doesn't drop HP or lose defense, but depending on your playstyle, it may or may not scare you. If it does, switch back to Fuzuroi. 8 out of 10.
Yoshimitsu.
Shiranui. Trades defense in favor of more attack and adding more unblockable moves through Soul Charge. I've seen worse starting weapons than this, but I've also seen better. Not a bad upgrade despite losing defense. 6 out of 10. Castain. Deals more damage than the former and takes counter damage instead of losing defense. A direct upgrade. Taking hits as counters isn't as bad as being a glass cannon. 7 out of 10. Zentetsuken. Deals the same amount of damage as Castain. This time it deals guard damage too. No downsides other than the beat breaking your A attack effect, which is useless. You might end up using this often. 8 out of 10. Da. Attacks deal lower damage, but they're counters. It's a downgrade compared to the previous weapons. Powerful single strikes? It's all lies. 4 out of 10. Kagekyo. Has a longer reach and Soul Charge makes more moves unblockable. The harsh trade-off is losing defense and health over time. This weapon is nothing more than a liability. Longer reach while risking taking more damage while charging for a small window of unblockable attacks while losing HP is not worth using it. It's about as effective as committing down AK. 1 out of 10. Pakayun. Soul Charge increases speed but loses defense. Another useless weapon that relies on Soul Charge yet again. At least it's not as bad as the previous katana. 2 out of 10. Monohole Shizao. Longer reach but loses health on attack. Yet another longer range weapon that is too risky. Even if you throw to prevent HP loss, it makes you want to use prior weapons with better buffs. 3 out of 10. Soul Edge. Deals 40% more damage and heals HP 40% on hit. It comes at a cost of not being able to guard. Easily his best weapon. The large damage buff and healing is what makes this deadly. One of the best Soul Edge variants that isn't too risky. If you love guarding, don't bother with it and stick with Zentetsuken. 9 out of 10. Hihiro Kane. Despite having a barely shorter reach, it deals 30% more damage. Soul Charge buffs more attack and defense. In the Japanese version, it has a 20% damage buff instead of 30 and loses defense. If the former's no guard debuff turns you off, this is a decent alternative. Although it does want you to utilize Soul Charge to make the best use out of it. 8 out of 10.
Nightmare.
Flamberge. Deals and takes guard damage. No pun intended, it's a double-edged sword. It's an okay starting weapon worth using for a short amount of time. 6 out of 10. Great Blade. Has a better Soul Charge but loses HP on an attack. Not worth hurting yourself in favor of slightly better Soul Charge, which leaves you open for attacks by the way. 3 out of 10. Steel Paddle. Higher defense, deals chip damage, and Soul Charge makes more moves unblockable. The drawback is taking reflected damage on hit. As far as risky weapons go, it's not the worst. At least it's an upgrade to Flamberge and worth more using than Great Blade. 6 out of 10. Glam. Deals more base and guard damage at the cost of taking damage as counters. A great earlier to mid-game weapon for Nightmare. Taking counter damage isn't as bad as losing health in any way. You'll most likely stick with this for a while due to it being a powerhouse. 8 out of 10. Requiem. Siegfried's Greatsword simply has more defense. Other weapons have more benefits. Even Steel Paddle has more than just a defense buff. At least it doesn't really have weak single strikes. Still safer compared to the paddle though. 6 out of 10. Faust. Defense increases and Soul Charge raises attack, but lose HP whenever you attack. It's Requiem but worse. Once again, Soul Charge is risky enough since it leaves you wide open to get attacked, and hurting yourself while attacking doesn't help either. More base damage is better regardless. 4 out of 10. Soul Edge Growth. Heals HP over time and deals more damage, but takes guard damage. It's a direct improvement over his prior weapons. The 20% attack buff feels like it's a little more than that due to Nightmare being a powerhouse. The healing can make up for its chip damage risk. Think of it as a lesser Valkyrie minus the defense buff. 9 out of 10. Soul Edge Complete. Buffs attack and defense, and even more attack through Soul Charge. It drains your HP over time and even more while charging. It's the most dangerous variant of Soul Edge. For you, not the opponent. The buffs are tempting, but it's ruined by 2 ways of losing health. And the design is disgusting. Avoid using this. 1 out of 10. Soul Calibur. Defense is higher and heals HP over time. The defense buff was added in the overseas version. It's a much better version of Requiem. The healing over time is insane, which makes it a highly defensive weapon. This is easily the best of the 3 Soul Calibur variants. 9 out of 10.
Ivy.
Mirage Blade. Deals a lot less damage, but Soul Charge makes more moves unblockable. A direct downgrade that not even Soul Charge can save. And no, it does not deal powerful single strikes. 3 out of 10. Wise Man Mace. Health recovers on attack but loses defense. If it wasn't for the 40% defense nerf, it would have been a decent weapon to use. For once, the healing doesn't make up for its shortcomings. This is another early game weapon to avoid. 4 out of 10. Dream Blade. Deals guard damage, finally a direct upgrade compared to the former 2. The vertical attack rating your horizontal attack doesn't matter since that's always the case no matter the context. Since Ivy likes to whip around with her weapon, the chip damage can help out. 7 out of 10. Chained Flail. Deals more damage but loses HP on attack. Unlike the first 2 weapons, the self-damage can be mitigated. Throws. It's still a dangerous option that'll risk getting double KOs. 5 out of 10. Viper Edge. Deals more damage and has the same useless side effect as Dream Blade. It's a safer alternate to Chain Flail and possibly her best weapon. You'll end up using this more often than her ultimate weapons. 8 out of 10. I'll Run. Buffs attack and defense at the cost of taking guard damage. Depending on your playstyle, you may or may not use it over Viper Edge. If you don't mind the chip damage risk and want more defense, go for it. Otherwise it's a slight downgrade but not terrible. 7 out of 10. Demon Tail. Attack increases through Soul Charge. And here I thought things would go better. As I said previously many times, dealing more base damage is always better than charging for small buffs for a short time. At least there are no debuffs. 5 out of 10. Soul Edge. Deals slightly more damage and Soul Charge buffs it more and defense, at the cost of losing HP during the charge and over time. It's Nightmare's Soul Edge variant, but worse. The smaller damage buff compared to the other variants and losing HP is what makes it the worst out of all of them. You do not want to use this weapon unless if you want to add more difficulty. 1 out of 10. Kaleidoscope. Deals a lot of guard damage, Soul Charge makes more moves unblockable, and it deals more base damage in the overseas version. You also lose HP on an attack. This weapon hurts you just as much as the chip damage since Ivy whips her sword often. Another ultimate weapon with a tempting upside being overshadowed by the health loss risk. 3 out of 10.
Cervantes.
Falchion. Buffs attack and defense despite having shorter reach. Like Taki, this is already his best weapon for most of the time. The buffs outweigh the minor 10% shorter range. A lot of his weapons aren't bad, but not as good as this one. 9 out of 10. Firengi. The description says it has good offense, but really it heals HP over time instead of increasing attack. It's still not bad for survivability. Even if it really had an attack buff, the previous weapon is still better. 6 out of 10. Erlang's Blade. It has a longer reach. Like Firengi, it has the worthless side effect of B breaking your A attacks. It's barely an upgrade to his default weapon and 10% is barely noticeable. 5 out of 10. Acheron. Soul Charge buffs attack and defense, but takes guard damage. Out of all of his weapons, this one is his least useful. Again, Falchion's base attack and defense buff is already good enough. The Soul Charge buff requirements held this weapon back. 4 out of 10. Phlegethon. Deals more guard damage and Soul Charge makes more moves unblockable, at the cost of having shorter reach. At least Soul Charge isn't fully required to make it work. Dealing chip damage isn't too bad either. Not as much of an upgrade, but still not bad. 6 out of 10. Cositas. Higher damage than Soul Charge makes more unblockable moves, but takes reflected damage on hit. It's slightly better than Akiron, but because of the self damage on hit, not so much. You could bypass the HP loss by throwing. 5 out of 10. Sticks. Soul Charge increases speed. That's pretty much it. Not much of a buff. 4 out of 10. Soul Edge. Deals more damage and heals HP on a hit. However, it severely drains HP over time, losing 4 HP over time, by the way. The health loss is indeed scary, but the power and HP recovery makes up for it a little bit. You have to go full on offensive for this to work, otherwise it'll end you quickly. 6 out of 10. Lethe. Has high defense and higher attack, but loses 5 HP per attack. Also, both of the blades have the same length, instead of only the left sword due to the right one replacing Nirvana. It's a combination of these two weapons. It's another highly damaging legendary weapon with a nasty trade-off, but not as dangerous as his Soul Edge variant. You could still throw to mitigate the drawback. If both of the ultimate weapons' HP loss scares you, stick with Falchion. 7 out of 10.
Sophitia.
Swordbreaker. Deals less damage and has a shorter reach, but at least Soul Charge is slightly better. This does not break swords, let alone opponents. This is a direct downgrade already. Easily her worst weapon. Heads up, most of her weapons are bad. 1 out of 10. See Short and Game Shield. It says it has powerful single strikes, but that's a lie. It's a glorified reskin of her default weapon. Once again, it has the B attacks being able to break A attacks effect for both you and the foe, which is void to begin with because it always happens no matter what weapon you use or how much damage you deal. 5 out of 10. Owl Shield. Trades attack power in favor of defense. At least there's a buff, but the 40% damage nerf is what ruins it. 3 out of 10. Blue Crystal Rod. Heals health on attack and Soul Charge raises defense. Once again, attack is lowered. Unlike her previous weapons, the healing makes up for it just by a little bit. Bonus points for referencing the Tower of Duraga. 6 out of 10. Fire Blade. Deals more damage and has longer reach. Takes reflected damage on hit. Another upgrade compared to prior weapons, but this time the sword can get too hot to handle. One way to cool off the self damage is to throw spam. 7 out of 10. Gladius. Soul Charge raises speed, but it does not decrease offense. At least there are no direct downsides. However, the Soul Charge speed boost is not as good as increasing more offense and defense, even charging. 6 out of 10. Sinval. Has a longer reach and deals counter hits but loses defense. It's a worse Fire Blade. The 35% defense nerf holds it back. Dealing counter damage isn't as beneficial as dealing improved base damage. 4 out of 10. Soul Edge. Deals more damage and recovers HP on hits with the cost of losing HP on attack. The healing outweighs the HP loss on attack whenever you land hits. This sword requires skill to use. For a Soul Edge variant, it's her best weapon to use. 8 out of 10. Orichalcum. Increases attack power and Soul Charges quickly. The Japanese version has a defense nerf. It's not as bad as her other weapons. The lack of Soul Charge buffs aside from the fast charge slightly hinders it. At least the increased base damage is a saving grace. 7 out of 10.
Astaroth.
Warhammer. Soul Charge deals more damage and makes more moves unblockable, but slows him down. It also has a shorter reach. Not much of an upgrade, especially when Soul Charge is required. Astaroth is one of the few fighters that gets hindered by shorter range. The Soul Charge requirement and slowdown is sort of not worth it. 4 out of 10. Terror Moon. Deals chip damage but loses defense. Even dealing chip damage, it's also not much of an upgrade. Use with caution. 4 out of 10. Battle Axe. Trades attack in favor of defense. Another downgrade. Astaroth needs the attack power so the dull blade doesn't help. 3 out of 10. Great Maul. Deals more damage but the reach is shorter. Finally an upgrade. Even though the shorter range can be concerning, the damage boost is pretty good. It makes a funny hammer sound, by the way. 7 out of 10. Tobal. Deals counter damage but takes chip damage. Usually when it says good offense means dealing more damage, but not this time. Inflicting counters isn't exactly as good as dealing more base damage. Taking chip damage is also not as dangerous as having lower defense. 5 out of 10. Nanbafu. Deals more damage but takes guard damage. Tabar but better. Takes the same amount of chip damage, yet at least the range remains unchanged, unlike Great Maul. One of his best weapons. 8 out of 10. Bulova. Has a longer reach and Soul Charge heals HP but loses HP on attack. Once again, it's another risky long-range weapon. At least you can patch up the lost HP through Soul Charge. Throwing in Soul Charge would be the best method of using it when having lower HP. Still not as good as his other axes. 5 out of 10. Soul Edge. Higher attack power and Soul Charge makes more moves unblockable while losing HP over time. At least you don't lose more HP when charging. This Soul Edge variant also sucks because the damage buff isn't as good as other ultimate weapons in general and the HP loss. Avoid this too. 2 out of 10. Thanatos. Increases defense and heals 75% on hit with the cost of not being able to guard. Even if you wish you could guard, the defense buff and healing makes this weapon a menace. It's his best weapon. No matter the playstyle, give it a chance. 9 out of 10.
Voldo.
Cat Claws. Deals more damage but takes damage as counters. Right away, it's his best weapon that isn't too risky. The 30% damage boost is plenty to inflict. 8 out of 10. Tonfana Scissors. Like Cat Claws, it deals more damage, but this time loses HP over time. This deals as much damage as the former, but it's not worth using because of the loss of HP. Just use Cat Claws instead. 3 out of 10. Shame and Blame. Trades attack in favor of defense. It's a downgrade, but at least it doesn't hurt you. There's another defensive weapon that works better than this. 4 out of 10. Iron Ram. Soul Charge buffs attack, but nerfs defense while charged. Again, just use Cat Claws for a more direct damage buff, without leaving yourself wide open and then lose defense. 3 out of 10. Heavy Jur. Has a longer reach with a B breaking your A attack effect, which is void by the way. Apart from the slightly longer reach, it's nothing special. 5 out of 10. Karma and Mara. Raises defense and has the same useless side effect as before. It doesn't have single weak strikes. This one's a defensive option that isn't the worst. If you want more defense, go for it. But more attack power is better regardless. 7 out of 10. Full Moon. Trades off attack in favor of more reach. Absolutely worthless. Even worse than the Scissors. The longer range is barely noticeable and the 30% damage nerf is pitiful. You could barely defeat anyone with it. 1 out of 10. Soul Edge. Deals more base and guard damage but loses HP on an attack. It's similar to Maxi's Soul Edge variant. The damage buff and chipping guard seems good on paper. Voldo is another multi-attacking character, so he'll end up hurting himself as much as the opponent. Use this with caution as well. 6 out of 10. Guillotine. Has a longer reach than the previous weapons. Soul Charge is also faster and grants an attack buff. It also takes reflected damage on hit. Finally, a weapon that synergizes with the fast Soul Charge. It's one of the better weapons that utilize it because it has more Soul Charge buffs, unlike most weapons that have supposed better Soul Charge. The reflected damage can be concerning though. It's not as bad as other risky ultimate weapons, even a Soul Edge variant. 7 out of 10.
Songmina.
Defender. Trades attack in favor of defense. Appropriate name for this weapon, but it didn't need to have a severe 40% attack reduction, but at the same time it's annoying to fight against. A lot of her weapons are better than this. 3 out of 10. Hypdo. Buffs attack and Soul Charge raises defense but takes damage as counters. A better starting weapon for her. Even the optional Soul Charge defense isn't too bad. 7 out of 10. Nagidana. Lowers attack but Soul Charge makes more moves unblockable. It does not deal powerful single strikes, let alone decent damage. Another spear to ditch. 2 out of 10. Chaos. It only deals guard damage. It's an okay alternative, but you're better off having more base damage than relying on chip damage. Mid at best. 5 out of 10. Bardique. Deals more damage than Hypdo while taking guard damage. Even though the additional damage seems good, the former has better benefits. Taking chip damage is slightly more dangerous than taking counter hits. Not the worst either. 6 out of 10. Halberd. Deals slightly more damage and heals plenty of HP over time at the cost of lower defense. On paper it's good, but the defense drop hinders this spear badly. It doesn't deal as much added damage as the other spears. You may or may not like this one. 6 out of 10. Ambassador. Soul Charge buffs attack and heals HP, but loses it on attack. It's similar to Astra's Boulevard. A fast multi-attacking character does not want to lose 5 HP per attack. Not even charging to recover lost HP would save this one. 4 out of 10. Soul Edge. Deals more damage and heals HP on attack, but takes counter damage. This is the best variant of Soul Edge. The damage buff and 40% healing makes her a menace. The recovery makes up for the counter hits. 9 out of 10. Kreese Felger. Harshly loses HP over time, but recovers it on attack and buffs some attack. I hate this weapon. It's worse than Cervantes' and Necrid's Soul Edge when it comes to HP drop. You have to keep attacking to stay alive. The attack buff is too small compared to her previous weapons. Avoid using this unless if you like to experience pain. 1 out of 10.
Necrid.
Lemurus. Trades attack in favor of Soul Charge, making more moves unblockable. Unfortunately, Necrid has more bad weapons like this one than good ones. It's a downgrade and the Soul Charge buff doesn't help. 4 out of 10. Morphos. Deals more damage but takes hits as counters. It's a simple upgrade that isn't too risky to use. You'll use this weapon often most of the time. 7 out of 10. Orcus Claw. Soul Charge buffs attack but loses defense and takes guard damage. Another bad option. The flimsy defense makes it a dangerous option. The Soul Charge requirement to buff damage is also a liability. Stick with Morphos instead. 2 out of 10. Ignis Fatuus. Trades attack in favor of defense and healing HP on each attack. It's a slightly better blue crystal rod. You don't need Soul Charge to raise defense. Even though the damage nerf is concerning, it's much safer than most of his weapons. 6 out of 10. Lampit Viper. Deals counter damage but loses defense. It's Morphos but worse. Dealing hits as counters isn't exactly the same as more base damage. Not exactly powerful single strikes. Defense is bad but not as bad as Orcus Claw. Still not worth using. 4 out of 10. Hex Lumine. Deals little damage, lowers defense and takes hits as counters. All of that in favor of large chip damage. This is the worst weapon in the game. The lacking attack in favor of big guard damage is ridiculous. You would have to hope for the opponent to guard often. And the lower defenses don't help. Avoid using this weapon unless if you want to do a challenge run. 0 out of 10. Infernal Edge. Deals more base damage and Soul Charge raises speed, but while charged it decreases defense and loses HP on attack. Another liability. The HP loss and Soul Charge losing defense prevents this from being a decent weapon. Speed boost doesn't excuse the shortcomings yet again. Use Morphos instead. 3 out of 10. Soul Edge. Similar to Cervantes' variant, deals more damage and heals on hit while losing a severe 4 HP over time. While the HP loss is harsh, the recovery on hit makes up for it. It's still a dangerous variant if not used properly. If you're using this, play offensively. 6 out of 10. Chaos. Copies the same weapon effects as the opponent besides range. A fun weapon to play around with. It's a nice way to get back at enemies using better or worse weapons. It's not perfect because there's a chance the enemy AI and even players would use default weapons or another Necrid using Chaos. 8 out of 10.
Link.
Razor Sword. Deals more damage but has a shorter reach and takes chip damage. Not much of an upgrade because of having more downsides than upsides, but at least there's a damage buff. Link is one of the few characters that don't want shorter reach. Still better than nothing and it could be worse. 6 out of 10. Armos Series. Soul Charge raises attack but loses base defense. A worse starting weapon. Having higher base attack is much better than Soul Charge buffs. Also, Soul Charge makes you more vulnerable to attacks if not used at the right time. 3 out of 10. Megaton Hammer. It's a better version of Razor Sword. It has more attack power but less reach. At least you don't take guard damage. Even though the shorter reach is worse, it's still a better alternative. 7 out of 10. Cane of Burna. Soul Charge raises defense and heals health. This is one of the few weapons that are good with Soul Charge. The amount of healing is plenty enough. It's best to throw and then follow up with a Soul Charge. A great defensive weapon that's even better than the previous offensive weapons. 8 out of 10. Mirror Shield. Even though you take counter damage, it's reflected back at the opponent by a chunk. They do not want to face this weapon when they're using weapons like Fireblade or Guillotine. It's more of a gimmick weapon than a useful one. 5 out of 10. Magic Sword and Magic Shield. Deals plenty of guard damage. It's an underrated weapon, but not as good as the Cane or even the next few. If it had more effects, then it would have been much better. Still, it's worth a try. 6 out of 10. Bigoron's Sword. Deals more damage and has a longer reach, but loses health on each attack. It's one of those typical risky, stronger weapons. At least it can be mitigated by throwing and the longer reach seems pretty good. 5 out of 10. Soul Edge. Raises attack and defense, but loses HP over time. It's about as risky as Bigoron's Sword, only this time HP gradually drops. The buffed attack and defense is his weapon's saving grace, but not by a lot. 6 out of 10. Great Fairy Sword. Has a longer reach, attack buff, and heals lots of HP over time, at the cost of taking guard damage. The chip damage risk is easily patched up by the healing. It's similar to Nightmare's Soul Edge Growth and Cassandra's Valkyrie, but with longer range. Borderline overpowered weapon. 9 out of 10.
Heihachi.
Gojo. drops a severe 60% defense in favor of dealing guard damage and counter hits. Right away, this is his worst weapon because of the defense drop. It's not worth risking dealing counter damage, which isn't as much as more base damage. 2 out of 10. Hakure Mononofu. The opposite of the former, less attack in favor of defense, but not as severe. The lower damage is still bad. At least you won't get KO'd faster. 4 out of 10. Kenko Daiichi. Drops defense again for healing over time. Songmina's halberd, but worse. The 40% defense drop with little healing isn't worth the trade. At least it's safer to use than Gojo. 4 out of 10. Tenka Musou. Deals higher damage and even more through soul charge, but takes counter hits. A direct upgrade compared to his other gauntlets. The damage boost is insane with or without soul charge. This is one of his best weapons. 8 out of 10. Hibi Tenran. Raises defense and deals counter damage, but loses HP on attack. And here I thought it would get better. The defense buff is better than imported samurai, but the HP loss ruins it. Not even throwing saves it. Stick with the previous one. 4 out of 10. Hadaka Ikan. Takes guard damage, but soul charge boosts attack and defense. Too risky to use. The chip damage risk and soul charge requirements makes this weapon left to be desired. Again, soul charge is already risky enough, leaving you open at the wrong time. 5 out of 10. Dohatsu 10. Faster soul charge but loses health on attack. Quick soul charge without any buffs doesn't excuse this from being a terrible option. Even Hibin Tenran has more benefits. Skip this one too. 2 out of 10. Soul Edge. The effects are just like Tom's variant. Trades defense in favor of more attack and healing on hit. Compared to his previous gauntlets, this is one of his best options. The attack buff and healing makes up for it being a glass cannon. It's just as good as Tom's variant and Tenka Musou. 9 out of 10. Tekken. Buffs attack and defense while losing HP over time. It also reflects damage back in the opponent. It would have been a great legendary weapon if not for the HP loss. Since he's not wearing gauntlets, it would have been more appropriate to have either a defense nerf or guard damage risk. Still not as bad as his other weapons. 6 out of 10.
Spawn.
Despair. Raises defense and deals chip damage, but takes hits as counters. The buff defense patches up to counter damage risk. It's a pretty decent starting weapon with strong guard damage. 7 out of 10. Malice. Reduces attack power, but damage taken is reflected back at the opponent. Just like Link's Mirror Shield, it's a gimmick rather than a useful weapon. Still, it's a nice way to scare off anyone using weapons that risk taking reflected damage. 5 out of 10. Torment. Damage is higher. Weak single strikes is a lie, it's the other way around. It also has the effect where your A attacks are harder to break with B attacks. That always happens in general, so it's pointless. It's still worth using until you get the next weapon. 7 out of 10. Misery. Buffs attack and defense while having that useless side effect from earlier. It may not deal as much increased damage as before, but the added defense saves it. This is his best option so far. 8 out of 10. Reaper. Has a longer reach and heals HP on hit, but takes chip damage. This is at least a usable weapon. It's not the greatest, but not bad either. The healing could be better than a paltry 15%. 6 out of 10. Vengeance. Deals more damage and even more through soul charge, but has the same side effect as Reaper. Taking chip damage. It's got a nice damage buff, but not as much as base damage as Torment and Misery. With both of them, you don't really need a soul charge, and they don't have the chip damage risk. 5 out of 10. Redeemer. Has a longer reach and soul charge increases speed, but saps HP during the charge and lowers attack. There's nothing redeeming about this axe. The lacking damage and meaningless speed boost don't mix well. Especially when charging hurts him. Easily his worst weapon. 1 out of 10. Soul Edge. Similar to Cervantes and Necrid's variant, higher damage and heals health on hit but loses it over time. This time it's not as harsh as theirs. Loses 3 HP instead of 4. It also deals the same amount of damage as Cervantes's. It's still a dangerous Soul Edge, but an offensive playstyle can make it work. 7 out of 10. Abomination. Deals the most amount of damage, 90%, but takes the most amount of self-inflicted damage on each attack, 9 HP. It also has a shorter reach. On paper it seems like a strong weapon. This is the riskiest weapon when it comes to losing HP on attack. The best way to use this is by spamming throws. A dirty tactic, but safer. Use it with extreme caution. 5 out of 10. And that's all of them besides the base and joke weapons. For those who are wondering why I don't have the joke weapons on this video, I've already done them in a separate video.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you want to see more of my stuff, subscribe and hit the bell. Okay, thanks, bye.